everybody out here. I have a subject that I'd like to talk about today, but before I do that, I want to thank each and every one of you for viewing my last video that I did on the 427 Mustang. A lot of you is engaged in some really good conversation. Some people were maybe a little upset with it. I think most people like the idea, but it's great. Thank you for all you viewers, and thank you for all your subscribers. I'm getting a lot of ideas and so on from that dialogue, so it's all good. Now, they're coming out with a new C8 Corvette, and I'd like to talk about that. But before I do that, I want to get into some history behind, you know, the performance cars that the big three have been making since the 60s, and you know, their brand identity and so on. Now, I'm vaguely remembering, and I've done a little reading on what happened back in the late 60s, around 1970. Ford and Mopar were really duking it out on the NASCAR tracks. And Mopar had built some pretty outrageous stuff. They built the Dodge Daytona, the Superbird, and they were running out on the big tracks. They had this big wing in the back and, you know, that long tapered nose. The car was real stable at high speeds. And Mopar developed a pretty romping motor for that car with the race Hemi. So the Mopars were really cleaning up out on the NASCAR tracks at that time. Ford was preparing a response to this. They built up a Torino Talladega that they actually raced. The car ran real good. I believe they ran a 429 or a Boss 429 in that car. I'm a little vague on the details here, so correct me if I'm wrong. They also developed a Torino King Cobra. This was a car that they were getting ready to run, and NASCAR would not let them run it. By the time they brought it to NASCAR for approval, they had banned specialty cars like that. They weren't going to let them run anymore. So they never got to run that car. But Ford also developed an engine somewhere in there, the single overhead 427, the single overhead cam 427 motor. I believe that this was an FE motor that Ford developed for racing. It made a lot of power, and it was a single overhead cam engine. This was a motor that they wanted to run in NASCAR, but NASCAR would not let them run it. For whatever reason they wouldn't let them run it. So the engine basically became a piece of history. It's up on the shelf, but it's very well known that Ford built this motor. And it was a great idea that they had, because it made a lot of power. Now, fast forwarding to the next period where we had overhead cam engines. You know, I think it was somewhere around 1990, and Ford came out with their modular motors at that time, 4.6s and 5.4s. I don't remember exactly which was the first vehicle that they put those engines in, but I'm thinking that it was the F-150 truck, possibly. I know that it was in the Thunderbirds and stuff like that, but you know, I don't know which one was the first one. You know, and I wasn't really happy with that. I didn't think that that was a great idea, but that's what Ford wanted to do. They stuck with that motor. They developed that motor. They tested that motor. They made it a little bit better when they came out with the 3-valve, and they continued the development. They supercharged it. They supercharged the 5.4 in the GT500s. You know, when they just stuck with this modular motor. They used it in their passenger cars, but they also used it in their performance cars. This was an engine that was used in the Mustang. And then eventually, all of that R&D on the 4.6 modular motor engine family, then came the 5-liter Coyote with its double overhead cam VVT. The Gen 1 from 11 to 14, the Gen 2 from 15 to 17, and then the current Gen 3 version that we have today. Now, this is a brand identity thing as far as I'm concerned. This is what Ford wanted for them. This is what they've used, and this is what they worked so hard to achieve. It was their vision that this was the future of performance engines, particularly V8 performance engines is what I'm talking about here. Now, what do the other manufacturers do? Well, as far as performance V8s, I don't know that Mopar actually built an engine like that. I don't recall, but if I'm wrong, please, guys, let me know. Chevrolet, they had a ZR1 Corvette from 1990 to 1994, I think. Pretty good motor. Engine made a lot of power. I think that car at that time, 0 to 60 times was something like 4.3 seconds. Pretty fast for the day. But then they dropped that motor. They decided not to build it. And they went back to push rods. They also built the Northstar V8. But this was not a performance engine. This was an engine that was put in the Cadillacs and some of the big cars at that time. This was not a Camaro or a Trans Am engine from the period. Yes, they built that motor. But none of those motors, not the modular motor all the way up to 2010, nor the Corvette ZR1 motor or the Northstar engine had the VVT. It wasn't available back then, so that wasn't in those engines. They ran pretty good, but they didn't have that. So Chevy decides not to go in that direction. The Camaros and the Corvettes went back to pushrods. You know, not that that's a bad thing, because a finely tuned pushrod motor with the proper, you know, level of cubic inches and so on can perform quite well. The current LS motors at 6.2 liters are a pretty good example of that. So I'm not hating on this stuff, guys. Don't get me wrong. The thing is, when you fast forward to today, okay, now they're going to come out with a C8 Corvette. And the C8 Corvette is going to have 3 engine options, 2 of which are going to be double overhead cam V8s in their performance car, the premier car, the Corvette, and it's going to be very similar in design to the Coyote motor. Now, this is something new in the late model era as far as I'm concerned, because brand identity for Chevy, for most of the, you know, the performance cars that Chevy's been building over the years, has been pushrod motors. But now they're coming out with double overhead cam, 32 valve V8s with the VVT technology. Now, the question's been put to me, or actually the statement's been put to me, you know, Chevy's not copying Ford. You know, they're not copying Ford. They've been doing this all along. You know, they built the Northstar. They built the ZR1 motor. No, they haven't been doing it all along. They started doing it. They had the idea to do it, but they dropped it, and they continued with their pushrod motor. And it's not such a bad thing. The performance was good. From 1993 to 2002, those Camaros were pretty fast. I mean, they were cleaning up on the Mustangs with the 4.6s. That's for sure. But you know, I think the question is, you know, is Chevrolet really copying Ford per se? I don't know, guys. I'm asking these questions. I'd like you guys to post your comments on this, because the C8 Corvette is going to have 2 engine options. One of them's a 4.2, I believe, and the other is a 5.5. And they both share the architecture that the current, you know, Coyote motors have. And you know, I spoke to somebody, and you know, trying to be objective here, but you know, the architecture of the Coyote motor is more efficient than any pushrod motor, even the old, you know, the Ford pushrod motors. It's you know, that's a fact. So I'm curious to know what you guys think. Is Chevrolet copying Ford, or are they just following the trend? I personally feel that, you know, it's inevitable that eventually the pushrod motors are going to go away. I don't see, I don't see pushrod motors in racing. You know, when you look at the engines, the V8 engines, or any of the engines really that they build in racing, they're not pushrod motors. They're overhead cam engines, you know, with computer-controlled camshaft movement. So you know, that's a question I'd like to kick around with you guys. And you know, there's another thing about the C8 Corvette. They've changed it. It's a completely different car than the previous model. It's now a mid-engine car. I don't know, when I hear that, you know what I think? Can you say Ford GT? Thanks for watching it, guys. Until next time, Coyote Car Guy, over and out.